this webinar for the GREENIN Micro Network Plus. So this is webinar number 48, but ideally this is the number, I believe, 6 actually, for the GREENIN. So it basically extend the legacy of the previous network, which was Reclaim Network Plus. So we're just continuing this webinar. So the GREENIN is a micro network which is funded by the UKRI, which is the EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Research, Physical Sciences Research Council, is the main funder actually for the proposal. And this is led by the Global Centre for Clean Air Research at the University of Surrey, and with the colleagues coming from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, Oxford, Bath and York, and Cranfield. So next please. So this webinar happens every Wednesday between 12:30 to 13:30, which is like a lunch. This is what we call it, lunch and learn. Can you please move the second slide? It's the second slide now, right? Yeah. So this is the team. So I am Prashant Kumar. So I'm professor and chair in equality and health and lead this network. But I've got my co-leads from the partnering institutions, bringing in the diverse set of sort of expertise. So if you wanted to know more about them, you can go over the GREENIN website and you can find those details there. So so this webinar, we as I said, we have been running it for almost around over like 3 years. In fact, this is 4th year. And this basically have got 2 speakers every time, and the sessions are recorded, so you can see on our YouTube channel. So we got our last webinar. We got these fantastic speakers, so you can go through their sort of their presentations if you're interested in. And today we got 2 fantastic speakers, which I'm gonna introduce one by one. So next slide, please. But before I do that, I just wanted to take your attention a little bit that we are running another project called GP4 Streets, which is the greening prescription for streets, which very relevant to what we are doing. And we have basically 2 surveys at the moment we are running. So one of the surveys about the environment and health impacts of the greening. The another one is the DIY sort of aspects of the greening. So in a way that how you can build your own sort of, the green walls and green roofs and so on. So we really encourage you to take the survey. So you can see the link there, which is the gp4streets.org/gp4street survey, or there is a barcode there. But we will post actually the link in the chat box as well, so you can pick those from there. So we really appreciate your help with these 2 surveys, if you could do that. Okay. So today we got 2 brilliant speakers, and they will be talking about very interesting work they have been doing around the indoor air quality, indoor nature, and the plants and the green space. So I'm gonna introduce you to one by one. So our first speaker is Dr. Meredith Whitten. She's an urban planner and a lecturer in environmental planning and at the UCL's Bartlett School of Planning. Her research sort of explores the intricate, evolving and often contested relationship between cities and the nature, and how this relationship is mediated through planning to address urban sustainability, with a particular focus on green infrastructure and planning governance. So she also serves as a research advisor for Parks for London and has worked in public policy and urban planning across the public, private and non-profit sectors for the UK and US. She holds a PhD in regional and urban planning from the London School of Economics. It's a real pleasure to have you, today. So in the meantime, you try to sort out your slides, just a few housekeeping notes. So these webinars are recorded, so you can have a look later on if you're interested. So we will share the link. Also that we each of our speakers will be speaking 20 minutes each. And if you have any questions, please write your name and affiliation with your question using Q and a chat box, which you can see on your screen there. So I will read out your questions after the both presentations to the speakers to respond to them. So without any further ado, so welcome, and over to you, Dr. Whitten.
Thank you very much, Prashant. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, that looks great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me and having me today. I'm very excited to be here. Today, I'm going to present some research that I've been working on really for a couple of years about the tension between local and strategic green space planning and governance. And I use green infrastructure as a lens for exploring this. And I'm going to go ahead and say my research largely focuses on more traditional kind of outdoor green spaces, but there's a lot of parallels. And when we're talking about a lot of parallels with indoor greening, and when we're talking about urban greening from a strategic perspective, as you'll see as I go through, we need to think about all types of greening and not limit ourselves to just one type of greening. And that can be problematic. So that's going to be essentially what I'm going to talk about today. So just a little bit of context. We know that there are multiple global intersectional crises that we're experiencing. So things like climate change and urban heating, an increase in chronic health conditions like diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, obesity, mental health crises, an increase in depression and anxiety, particularly among young people and emerging adults. As the world becomes more urbanized and more of us live in cities, more of us are then exposed to the we have our urban lifestyle is more associated with exposure to anthropogenic environmental hazards like pollution and urban stressors like noise and crowding. We're of course in the middle of a biodiversity crisis as well, with dramatic biodiversity loss and habitat fragmentation. And then around the world, there are increasing inequalities, especially in health outcomes and inequalities in access to nature. And I mention all of this to point out that these crises they're felt locally, but they're also felt at a global scale. So addressing them requires tools that can provide both those kind of local and broader solutions. So one tool, a very prominent tool that planners have, is urban green space. And an evolving body of research connects urban green spaces with an ever-growing list of benefits. Things like urban cooling, food growing, health and well-being benefits, even economic development and cultural identity and that social belonging. And these benefits accrue at the local neighborhood scale, but they also provide benefits at broader, more global scales. So for example, local scale greening can create and restore habitat that can enhance local biodiversity, such as by facilitating wildlife or pollinator corridors, and that can have mental health and well-being benefits. And at the same time, these local interventions can contribute to regional, national, and even international biodiversity objectives. So the point is that both the challenges and the tools to address them are felt at multiple scales. So although integrating green space into cities is by no means a new practice, it's centuries old, why and how we do so is evolving. So green spaces historically have been framed as sites for leisure, recreation, and amenity for nearby residents, so they're very much considered a local asset. And this is relevant for indoor greening as well, kind of thinking about this limited rationale for providing green spaces traditionally. Yet recognition of green spaces' broader, multifaceted benefits has really emerged alongside this amenity function. And as a result, what we see is that green space is repositioned for its functionality and repositioned within a diverse range of green and other natural elements. So things like street trees, vegetated walls, roadside verges, community gardens even. And this moves green space beyond the kind of limited passive domain of parks and is much more considered as green infrastructure, as functional infrastructure. So as green infrastructure, then the concept of urban green space shifts from something that is amenity to something that's necessity, as Hannah Wright so eloquently put it. And the word infrastructure is very intentional. It equates green space with other more traditional kinds of gray infrastructures, especially like transport or road networks. And what this does is it reframes green space from being just a local asset to something that needs to be thought of in a more strategic or system-wide way. And although the definition of green infrastructure is still very contested, and there's a lot of variations in kind of that approach, kind of disciplinary variations, there are some guiding principles that really have emerged across these different variations. And that includes green infrastructure is strategically planned. Green infrastructure also has spatial and administrative connectivity, and green infrastructure is multifunctional. But in practice, the spatial and administrative connectivity and managed multifunctionality that come from a strategically planned approach can be quite challenging to realize. And that's what my research explores. I look at the barriers to a more strategic approach to, or a more green infrastructure approach to green space planning. And this research is grounded in London. London provides a really insightful case for exploring this research because London has a very long history with green space and planning for green space, but also London has a very decentralized governance approach with 33 different local governments that act essentially autonomously and are responsible for delivering green space and green infrastructure. And then you have at more kind of the regional or strategic level, the Greater London Authority and the Mayor of London, who, despite having that kind of strategic oversight, actually have very little authority and responsibility for urban greening. So, a few years ago, there were two organizations that emerged around the same time, the London Green Spaces Commission and the London National Park City Foundation. And both of these seem to have this kind of pan-London or citywide perspective on green space planning and governance. So what I've done in my research is I use these two organizations as a vehicle for exploring whether we are seeing a shift from thinking about green space as really a hyper-local asset to something that's also more strategic. And so I conducted interviews, 25 interviews with members of both of these organizations and their support staff. The two organizations are quite interesting because they're very different, even though they emerged around the same time. So the London Green Spaces Commission was a time-limited commission that was appointed by the Mayor of London. And so it has this very kind of top-down, very formal kind of traditional government commission format. Whereas the London National Park City Foundation was very much a grassroots initiative. It emerged from local campaigners, and the organization still exists, and it is very much takes kind of a bottoms-up or community-led approach. But both of them, why I was interested in putting the two together is they both, in their missions, kind of at least, if not directly, indirectly refer to these ideas or these principles of green infrastructure. So the London Green Spaces Commission in their mission say that they want to promote London's public green spaces as a coherent and functioning infrastructure. So they actually say it very directly. Whereas the National Park City Foundation talks about making London a city where people, places, and nature are better connected. So again, that idea of connectivity. So I'm going to the rest of the presentation, I'm going to just highlight some of the findings that came from these interviews. So overall, the interview respondents said that we cannot realize the multifunctional benefits of green space without simultaneously planning at multiple scales. They said that a strategic and a local approach were equally important, and they really discussed these approaches as being complementary and not contradictory, or not competing with each other. That said, they were incredibly skeptical that this could actually happen, calling a strategic, holistic approach really not feasible, given how deeply embedded governance, funding, and statutory or lack of statutory processes are in a local setting. And they also talked about the antagonistic relationship across different scales of governance. So I'm going to highlight some of the themes that emerged for why they felt this way. So the first is about lack of administrative infrastructure. The administrative infrastructure, the political will, and really the kind of voices or advocates are not strong or not even available in some instances at the strategic level, they said. And this lack of existing infrastructure limits coordination and collaboration across scales. And this was quite telling, especially for the Green Spaces Commission, because their kind of output was this report that only had 2 recommendations. And the first recommendation was that London needs a strategic organization to champion and really plan for green spaces. Very timely, given we have elections tomorrow. They also said that short-term political cycles lead to a focus on capital projects and what one respondent called photo-worthy things. So for example, ribbon cuttings for new playgrounds rather than long-term investment in building partnerships or contributing to citywide greening initiatives are going to be the things that are more important given these local level short political cycles. They also talked about the strained relationship between local authorities and the GLA and how this inhibits collaboration and flexible coordination. And they were quite critical of the GLA, including some of the folks I interviewed were the support staff for the Green Space Commission who actually work at the GLA. And they were critical of the GLA's lack of strategic planning for green infrastructure and lack of role for what they described as a need for really leading transformational change. So they criticized an emphasis on operational issues like funding for specific local level green infrastructure projects. So really, kind of getting into the weeds when what they really wanted to see the GLA do was take more of that kind of transformational leadership role. So another issue that came up was about what I've called scalar misalignment. London's decentralized approach to green space planning is inefficient for addressing the transboundary challenges like climate change that can't be addressed solely by local initiatives or by local project by local project, but rather required at least in tandem a coordinated pan-London approach or response. So a solely local-led approach doesn't fit with how nature works or how people move across the city and how we access green space. So if you think about how you go about your daily life, you move through public space, private space, you're in buildings, you're outside, you encounter, trees, other kinds of, hedgerow, verges, traditional parks, indoor planting, and these kind of administrative boundaries, these arbitrary administrative or borough boundaries that we have really don't fit how people and the environment actually work. So a city scale response is needed to address higher level challenges that transcend those arbitrary administrative borders. And these don't have to be just environmentally related challenges. They can, one of the most prominent things that folks mentioned had to do with workforce training and skills. That is, as we are shifting the functionality of green space and urban greening to be more of a functional, green infrastructure, that we also need different skills that come with that. And that's not something that can be addressed, borough by borough or local level by local level, or really even at the regional level, that there needs to be some national involvement in that skills development as well. A locally led approach allows for flexible decision-making, responsiveness to local characteristics, and to changing demands and context. Local governments and local community organizations have the expertise, the experience, and the familiarity with residents' needs and preferences. And this kind of administrative agility and expertise doesn't really exist in those kind of broader regional governance scales. But in practice, respondents said that green space often remains very organizationally isolated within a local authority rather than being coordinated kind of organizationally across. So local authorities consider green space from different perspectives. So on the slide here, I've got 4 different types of green space that are green infrastructure that could appear within one borough or one local authority. So planning, housing, highways, leisure, health, education, cultural services, all of these different departments or teams can be involved in delivering green infrastructure. And this can result in a very piecemeal approach to green space planning and management. And that's contrary to those principles of green infrastructure that focus on the interconnectivity, both spatially, but also administratively. And a lack of statutory status for urban greening and deep cuts to those discretionary services like the provision of urban green space further frame green space planning as a low priority. And then the final point I want to highlight, inconsistency across local government was the most prominently cited limitation to local green space planning that respondents raised. Quite simply, local authorities prioritize urban greening differently. A local approach can lead to what one respondent called a postcode lottery that results in unequal green space access, quality, investment, and community engagement. And this can result also in duplication, inefficiency, and limited capacity to address those transboundary or more strategic challenges. It also can exacerbate inequalities across the city, as a decentralized green space planning can really obfuscate areas of need across the collective city. So while each of the 33 boroughs in London has areas within it that is deficient in access to nature, this is relevant or relative across the city. So making decisions at a strategic level might mean more investment goes to one part of London than another. But if we're really thinking strategically, it means that overall, London gets a better result. And then just quickly, I'll mention that as we've seen really a drastic cut in funding and resources at local authorities, they have less of an inability to provide urban greening, especially for sustained maintenance. And this lack of local authority resources has made it that more likely that green spaces are not provided by the local authority directly. So community organizations tend to be more responsible or more influential, but their focus is rightfully on the local level. They tend to get involved for hyper-local issues or for local amenity issues, not really for concerns like city-scale climate change. And this can further embed the local, and it can also exacerbate inequalities because those community organizations are not all resourced at the same level. So finally, the respondents discussed what I call strategically local green space planning. They described a pan-London network of locally contextualized urban greening, supported with a strengthened and more formalized strategic coordination and consistency from the GLA or regional organizations. So managed as part of an interconnected and multifunctional network, local green spaces can have strategic importance. And they drew parallels with transport planning in river catchment areas, which they said are approached more strategically and can provide a blueprint for how we think about green infrastructure. That said, they were pessimistic that a simultaneous local and strategic planning can occur. As a discretionary, municipally led and community managed service, green space is deeply embedded as a local governance issue, and this sidelines the strategic perspective needed to address increasingly complex and transboundary problems. So while they were pessimistic about this feasibility, ultimately they said that a collaborative multi-level planning approach is needed to leverage green space for health and ecological benefits for all Londoners or for everyone in the city. So my last slide is about what considerations we can take from this research for indoor greening. I think there are a lot of parallels. I hope that those have sparked some thoughts and some interest in seeing those parallels. Indoor greening itself is often treated as aesthetic, but can function as this network is about, can function as more infrastructure, supporting air quality, thermal cooling, or thermal comfort, and well-being, for example. Indoor green space is often privately owned, which raises questions about who benefits and potentially reinforcing uneven access to nature as well. Those issues around maintenance and long-term viability are incredibly essential in indoor greening planning. So whether you're talking about outdoor or indoor greening, it requires ongoing technical expertise, funding, and management. And then the idea of integration with wider urban systems. Our lives our existence with green space and our relationship with green space don't stop. It doesn't stop when we enter a building or when we leave a building, yet we can kind of think about these two approaches as being very disconnected or very disparate when we really need to think about the wider green infrastructure network if we really want to provide urban greening for human and for ecological health. So that's it for me. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Meredith. This is a very interesting presentation, and thank you for sharing the fantastic insights you have from London. We'll take the questions later on, so whoever have any questions for Dr. Whitten, please do write, use the Q&A chat box and write with your name there. In the meantime, I would like to invite our second speaker today, Nicole Bogerd. She's a seasoned assistant professor at the Department of Clinical Neuro and Developmental Psychology at VU Amsterdam. She examines on how everyday physical and social environments, and particularly nature-rich environments, influence the mental health and well-being of young people. So this work covers multiple contexts, including school settings as well as residential and other everyday environments. During her talk, she will specifically talk about the presence of indoor nature in study settings, work which has been part of her PhD. So that is really, it's really a great pleasure to have you here. Yeah, you could possibly share your slides.
Yes, we'll start there.
Yeah, over to you. Yeah, thank you.
All able to see my slides? Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. And indeed, I'm going to talk to you about today about some of our older work, which was actually a part of my PhD already a few years back, but I think still really relevant. And it's going to be about indoor nature in the study environment for the well-being of students. So before I dive in, I want to ask the audience that is here today, welcome by the way, a question. Let me see. Yeah, where would you prefer to study? This study room, classroom, or maybe the second classroom? Maybe you can drop a 1 or 2 for the first or the second in the Q&A box, so I can get a view of your preferences. Second, already people saying second. I don't exactly see I see things popping up, but I don't see the full Q&A box, but I see a few seconds. Yes, let's go going. And actually, this concurs with one of our research findings in which we did a research, in which we manipulated photos of different study areas with different conditions. So either I had like a blank room, normal classroom in this example, or a colorful poster. or poster of a green space, a green wall, or green wall plus plants. And we did that for 3 types of study, indoor study areas, like a self-study area, and a lecture hall. And what we found here in this research is basically exactly the same what you guys, the audience, also found, is that students preferred the study areas that had some type of nature in there. So either the nature poster or the green walls with with potted plants. So from this research, it became pretty clear that students have a preference for nature in their study areas, but yeah. So and actually, this also concurs with what we call the biophilia hypothesis, which suggests that people have which hypothesize, I'm sorry, that because humans relied on nature to survive previously, that they have this innate need to connect with nature and other living systems, suggesting that this affinity of nature and other living, this affinity for nature, that is also crucial for our mental and emotional health, and also our physical health. And knowing that these students have this preference for indoor nature, or for nature in their study areas, we thought, okay, they have this preference, and we have that by the philia hypothesis suggesting that indoor nature can also indeed maybe benefit the well-being of students. Let's see what the research says about the actual benefits of nature in study areas, and based on previous research has already given us some indications suggesting that indoor nature in study areas or in school setting may be beneficial for the productivity of students, for their emotional well-being, for reduced stress, for improved attention, and also greater preference. And although there was already quite some work on the potential benefits of indoor nature for well-being, what we saw is that a large share of this work has been executed in experimental settings, so in lab kind of studies, meaning that we don't know if these results found also translate to actual classrooms, to the real life world. So that is one thing that we wanted to do, to investigate if actual indoor nature in study areas can improve students' mood, stress, cognitions, health complaints, and perceived environmental quality in real life areas. Meaning that what we wanted to do is not manipulate any situation, but test students or examine real life situations during actual classes. So we didn't want to manipulate kind of a false lecture to do it before and after. We wanted to do in the actual real world with actual teachers with the normal classes. And thinking about this, we came up with quite some, there were some barriers, of course, because if you want to do some research in the real life setting, then you also have to work with the real life setting, meaning that you cannot interrupt a class 3 times or 2 times, both before and after, or that measurements can also not take too long, because teachers might say, yeah, we have an hour for this lecture, for example, or 2 hours maybe, but you cannot take away like 2 hours of my lecture to do your studies. So what we did, we did several experiments, and in each of them we relied heavily on self-reported measures, like brief surveys, and or shorter attention testings, which could be done in classroom settings. And we started with 3 field experiments in different types of schools. We had a university, which was the top row, in which we had a control classroom and 2 classrooms with indoor nature. And we were able to test around 70, no, not around, we were able to test 70 university students. We also had a secondary school in which we also had a control classroom, a classroom with potted plants, and also a very minor classroom with some flowers. They are hard to see, I know, on picture F, but they are there. And then we had a vocational training school. Not sure if that's something that you guys will also have in the UK, but there's usually a little bit older student doing vocational training. We had 161 students we could test, and we had also a control classroom, of course, and then we had also 2 classrooms with indoor nature. And the experiments all had different designs, research designs, but we made sure that we had a baseline measurement in each. So before any greening took place, so there were a baseline measurement in each. And in each setting, we did the surveys or the attention tests directly after a lesson. So after a lecture, or after the lesson, meaning that we did not do a baseline before a class started. So we did a baseline several weeks before, but we didn't do within class or within the lesson changes. Maybe that's good to know. And combined, what we saw over these 3 field experiments is that we saw that students rated the environmental quality higher, what basically meant that they gave the classroom higher grade for how it looked and also how attractive it was. But unfortunately, we were unable to see any measurable effects on measures of stress or at mood, even though we found only in the secondary students that there was less fatigue reported. We didn't find any or no comparable differences in health complaints nor cognition, and we had both self-reported attention and attention tests. I can have a whole discussion to put this in context, but I'm going to continue to a fourth study that we did and make an overall, put it in an overall context. So after these 3 experiments, we did another field experiments in another type of study environment or school environment, and we did a field experiment in a university library, not our own, but in Amsterdam, but another university, and we had 2 study areas which almost identical, not exactly identical, and located directly above each other. And for one, we kept it as is, like as the control, and then the other we placed indoor plants in it. And for this study, we also had first a baseline in which we asked students how they felt about the rooms, what they did, etc. Then we placed the plants, and for 2 weeks we did nothing, just so that students could get themselves familiar with the plants, to make sure that it's not a novelty effect of the plants, but that students were able to get used to the plants and the nature in the rooms. And then we did a post test after. And because it's a self-study area, you don't know which students will take place, which students will join these areas. So we had basically a repeated cross-sectional design, meaning that the students who participated in the first 2 weeks were not necessarily the same students that also participated in the second, in the experimental period. And also here we found that students rated the perceived environmental quality, the attractiveness and comfort of the room with the plants much higher. But again, we did not find a measurable change in self-reported mood or self-perceived cognitive performance. However, we did ask students if they would use the room with plants again, or would next time they will come to study, and that we only did a baseline, of course, and around 60% said yes, we will use this study room with the plants again next time because of the plants. And They were also asked to elaborate a bit on that, and we were able to derive some themes from their answers. And what the students mentioned is that they thought that the environmental quality of the room with the potted plants was better, that there was better atmosphere related to just the feel of the room. It was better for their stress relief, they said. It made them feel homely, or as we say in Dutch, it was more gezellig. There's no English word for the word gezellig, but we came across that word a lot, so it felt more homely. And they said that the climate was better in the room there. And what this tells us, these findings tells us that although we were unable to find measurable change in mood, if we ask students what do you feel, how do you feel about those plants, they do say things as, it gives us stress relief and it makes me feel more homely, which is almost a little bit contradictory. But it does suggest that there's something in there, that even though we're unable to detect those differences in the well-being, students do perceive the room with potted plants as a better room for their well-being. So to put this a little bit into context, we try to do field experiments in a real-life setting, and these have a lot of pros because it really adds to the ecological validity of your study, but it also has its downsides because we were limited in the designs that we could use. For example, we're unable, in all cases, we were unable to measure within session, within class, or within lecture changes within the students, for example. We relied heavily on the self-reported measures, and unable to maybe use other forms of other indicators of well-being, maybe heart rate or other objective measures. And overall, in all of our findings, students showed little stress and relatively good mood. So meaning that if they don't appear to have little stress, there's very little room for improvement, of course. So that's also something to consider. And what we see in lab experiments, often they induce a stressor first to have the participants in lab research stress, and then you will see the direct effect of nature and indoor nature on stress relief. But because we wanted to do in a real life setting, we were unable to induce such a stressor, hypothesizing that a lecture on its own or studying on its own is stressful enough. But apparently, this was not the case. So what does this all mean taken together? It does not mean that we should not implement indoor nature in study areas, not at all, actually, because even though we were unable to find measurable effects, laboratory studies does suggest improved well-being benefits, and especially since we have done this work, new studies have come out that also support the hypothesis that indoor nature can benefit the well-being of students or others. And I said before, the self-mentioned responses also does suggest that the students perceive benefits from indoor nature. And importantly, consistently, we found that students do prefer indoor nature study areas over the control areas. So in short, I think for the real life setting some more research is also still needed to really untangle how indoor nature in real life real life settings work and what their benefits could be, and that's the way forward. And we should definitely keep implementing nature in the study areas. That was all for now. Thank you very much for listening.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. Interestingly, there is not a lot of work actually on the indoor sort of the greening and what sort of the physical and mental health, the effect that has. So these are really, the interesting insights, and there is a lot more needed. And this is why I think, on the back of us was this idea of the network to set up more work actually, and bring together the like-minded people who are interested in this works, in this topic area, to kind of, add more evidence base. So fantastic presentations, both of you. Thank you very much for your time and doing this. So I think what we could do is, we still got around 10 minutes or so. We could potentially, take the questions. I can go into the Q&A box, so I can see that there are some questions which is coming through. So can I please ask everybody to please do write your questions there, using the Q&A chat box. So I think I've got a question from Tom Childs. It's for Nicole. And the question is, some questions, don't worry about answering all of them, okay? To what extent are results related to amount of indoor nature? What is enough nature? Can a plant achieve as much as a green wall of plants? Is benefit mainly visual, e.g. could be a view, or other sensory basis of nature? For example, would similar come from low-level bird song or scents? Are some plants better than others? Is novelty important? A real view changes. Does the benefit continue, or are there any advantages to mix it up, take things away, or change them? So basically, there are a number of questions there. So I think you have a choice to pick up whatever you.
No, yeah, these are actually great questions. And maybe those are the questions that I refer to when we say we need to know much more. Like, what is enough, and is a green wall better than potted plants? And in this research that we did, we just had or both green wall and potted plants. We did not try to see the differences between a green wall and potted plants, for example, and flowers. But this is something that we need to follow up on. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the Netherlands, it's quite difficult to get research funding for this type of research. So we haven't been able to follow up on it. Yes, there are some research that I have been investigating the difference between, for example, the potted plants, and do we need 10 plants in the front of the classroom, or is one enough? I don't have the answer to that now, like directly at the top of my head. But there is some follow-up work on that already. People are already doing that, luckily. And we did have, with respect to the sensory basis, we did hypothesize that real indoor nature was preferable over a landscape of greenery, for example, because the sensory information, you can not only see them, but you can also smell them, maybe even touch them if you're interested. So we did assume that the tangible or the sensory information given by the plants, that was better than in real life setting, is better than a picture of nature. Does that answer some of the questions, do you guys think?
Yeah. I think we don't have a lot of time, so if you have any further questions, please drop it to me, and I can pass on to Nicole for further sort of insights. I'll move on to the next question. So that question is from Bilal Hussain. He's a MSc student. He's doing his dissertation with me, and he's asking a question: what key strategic approaches should cities adopt to overcome, the environmental challenges? Like, these are like high dense environments, in terms of, let's say, the indoor and outdoor greening. So I think it's kind of open actually for both of you, basically, whoever wants to pick it up.
I can say a few things. So I think it's a great question, and it's unfortunately a question or a challenge for increasingly lots of places. But I think kind of moving away from a focus on kind of our institutionalized ideas of what green space is, and thinking more innovatively about what green space is, rather that's indoors or outdoors. And I talk about like the green in between, and even in some of Nicole's pictures, you know, the plants were kind of placed in between dusk. It's kind of incidental to how you go about your daily life. And if we kind of think about the in-between spaces outdoors, and just those spaces could be thought of as green spaces instead of kind of more traditional, you know, parks or open spaces, that really opens up the opportunities for increasing the amount of green space, but also the types, and being more innovative in a diverse types of green infrastructure. But I think kind of from the administrative or governance side, it's fundamental that the approach is multidisciplinary and multi-scalar, that's kind of the siloed approach to how we green our buildings, indoors, outdoors, green our environments, and the limitations that come from that are often because we're thinking in a very siloed way, and we're not really thinking across an organization, so across, you know, kind of administratively strategic, but also thinking, you know, what that means for kind of a spatial strategic approach. So that multi-level governance and having lots of different people around the table and thinking about planning and the kind of resources and funding that can come to that, and the kind of innovative approaches to multifunctional green infrastructure. Those are I think are fundamental bedrocks to it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which comes from Brazil, Professor Maria de Fatima Andrade. She asked about, very interesting, the discussion about the two approaches for the parks in the city. In peripheric areas of city with low open spaces for greening, how to show the importance of the green areas. Shall I repeat the question again? So basically, you talked about the approaches for the parks in the city, I believe. So in periphery areas of the city where, you know, you have low open spaces for greening, how to show the importance of these green areas to the people possibly. Because there are definitely, you know, in the city, they are quite spread in a sense that some of the cities are very well green. So I was last week in Beijing, and I was amazed actually to see that how much green cover the city has. But then you will find actually a lot of European cities or elsewhere as well, but part of the city is very green, but the rest is not as much, you know. So I think it's possibly the question is about how the importance of the green areas could be made actually to the, you know, to that particular sort of community or the people, you know.
Is that question for me? Is that
Anybody, if you have any views in there.
Well, I mean, I do think that again, kind of, you know, like I mean, I'm originally from the U.S. where we get in a car and drive to a park often, and you know, thinking about green areas as destinations is what limits the thinking. Not that those aren't important spaces for health and recreation and well-being, but really thinking them in a more multifunctional way. So it's not just a place where I go and you know, walk my dog or meet my friends, but it's also, you know, a pollination corridor, or it's providing, it's part of a, you know, a flood mitigation project. And so really looking at the kind of the multifunctionality of what different types of green infrastructure can do collectively, I think raises it shifts the change from thinking about these as kind of cosmetic afterthoughts that are often the last thing added to planning and the first thing cut, and instead of that, seeing it as essential as a road or utilities, and so really kind of reframing the purpose of those green spaces, I think helps them rise up the kind of agenda and get more policy focus.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. I think in the interest of time, we will possibly take one more question. that is from Joe Robson. I work at a local primary school in Surrey, which is part of the Southwark diocese. We are using several initiatives to reduce our carbon footprint. Energy Sparks help us to monitor energy usage, and Let's Go Zero, who will help with producing a CAP, which is climate action plans. Is there anything else schools could be doing to improve well-being and to reduce carbon impacts? I believe in the indoor greening context, I think there is a lot of opportunities there, which maybe, Nicole, you could highlight actually some of the work you have done, showing the positive impact in some sense of the indoor greening.
Yeah. Sorry, again, the question?
But what could the school do basically to improve the well-being and to reduce
Well,
carbon impacts?
Well, in all honesty, so we also in the Netherlands do a lot of work on the green schoolyards. And what I always say, especially many schools have low budgets, etc. Any start is a start. And
Yeah.
even the smallest changes can have some impact. And I think it's also what you do with the students, which is easier maybe on primary schools than it is for maybe university, where you have a little bit less contact with the students. But in maybe primary, secondary schools, you can do small things together with your students based on maybe their needs, which doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Maybe starting with, if it's outdoor, starting with removing some of the stones from the schoolyard and planting some small plants. Or I don't know, on primary schools maybe you could also do bring your own plant to your classroom. So I think even the smallest changes or smallest steps can maybe have on the long term also beneficial effects for the children in some sense, with a connection with nature. I'm not exactly sure if that's as tangible as Tom I was looking for, but I feel larger project might feel overwhelming, but starting small could already be really helpful. And that maybe relates also to what Meredith said at the end of the project. It's in their plans is mostly a private thing, but you can make a collective thing with the whole school, maybe if you have a little project around it or something.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. I also got a question from Sudarshan. My apologies for not picking that up. He asked about the success stories in this context. Maybe that would be something we'll pick it up, later on. But in the interest of time, because you only got a minute actually, so I think I would like to use this minute actually to introduce the upcoming sort of the webinar. And yeah, so basically just to say that the next webinar, again, it will be on the same time on the first week of so this happens actually the first week in every month on Wednesday, 12:30 to 13:30. We got two fantastic speakers coming from Australia. Oh, that's amazing actually, having two of them coming from Australia. That might be quite a lot of time difference actually. So one is Dr. Fraser Trolpe. So he's the Director of Plants and Environmental Research Quality Group, talking about the potted plants and indoor air pollutant removal, what 4 decades of research will tell us. And the other one is Dr. Peter Erga. He's talking about the active botanical filter systems, from green wall technology to in-suit air treatment at building scale. I believe that this basically answers some of the questions you guys asked in terms of what could be done actually in the classrooms or the indoor settings to improve the health and well-being, but also bringing, the improving the indoor environmental quality and reducing the carbon footprint. So definitely want you to sign up for this next webinar, which is going to be next month, with these fantastic speakers who have really done a lot of work actually, in this particular area. So I think we are really lucky to have them, both of them speaking actually on our next webinar there. So if you are not a member of the GREENIN networks, I would encourage you to join the network as a member. So you can do it in two ways. The one is you can scan the course code, I mean the barcode if you have a phone on your hand, or simply go onto the GREENIN website. So with this greenin.org, as you can see, the website link on the top, and then on the top you will say join us. So if you click on join us, there's a little form. So once you click on that form, then you will start, once you submit that, you will start getting the notifications of the webinars, other funding opportunities, other networking opportunities. So if you're not really a member yet, it's free membership, so it doesn't cost you anything. Please do go and join that membership there. We are also on the LinkedIn, so if you wanted to know the frequent sort of the updates, so please do follow us on the LinkedIn and also on the Blue Sky. So if you are on the Blue Sky, so if you find out GREENIN and X also, so you can find out GREENIN and you can join us basically there, so you can see the detail there, so you can know more about on a regular basis or daily basis what's happening within the network. So and if you have any questions, please do drop a line to me or for the GREENIN Micro Network team. So before I close, I would like to thank again our two brilliant speakers and taking their time out and sharing their insights. So thank you very much. So give a big round of applause to all of them. And then we should not forget actually the people who are working in the background, so especially Kanika has been taking a lot of load actually when the previous project manager has moved on. So thank you very much for all your help in organizing it. So you will hear from us with an email, which will include the link of this recording, so you could watch it in your own sort of convenience and share with whoever you like to. But we are, by the way, on the YouTube channel as well. So maybe the next time around, we will add the details of the YouTube channel on the slide, so you can see all these past videos there as well. Yeah, thank you very much. See you next month. Bye bye.